Welcome to today's edition of the Author's Corner, brought to you by KNEO 91.7 FM The Word, and I'm Roberta Foster. And today I welcome Seth Gruber to Author's Corner, and he is the documentary filmmaker of the 1916 Project. And Seth, thank you so much for taking time to be with me today.
Yeah, thank you, Roberta. Thanks for having me on.
So tell us, for those that don't know, tell us what the Project 1916 is and why you felt compelled to create this documentary.
Yeah, so the 1916 Project revolves around the date 1916 when Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, opened her first clinic in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. That really was the first clinic that became the billion-dollar organization we know today as Planned Parenthood, the best-funded 501c3 in human history, the largest abortion provider in the world, the largest provider of the pornographic, obscene, comprehensive sexuality education in America's public schools, and the second largest provider of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. This can all be traced back to 1916. Margaret Sanger is probably the most successful revolutionary kind of cultural Marxist of the 20th century, whose fingerprints on today's very insane, stupid, upside-down culture are greater than anyone else that spawned out of the 20th century. But it's also a play on the New York Times 1619 Project, which claimed that America's systemically racist root and branch. It's not redeemable. The only way to solve America's quote-unquote systemic racism is to burn it all down and rebuild it from the ashes. And so the New York Times argued that our real birthday as a country should not be 1776. It should be 1619, when the first black slaves came to American shores, because that so represents our bigotry and racism as a country. Basically, America sucks, and if you disagree, that's proof of your racism. So that was the New York Times 1619 Project. That led into George Floyd. That led into 1619 Project being actually K through 12 curriculum in a lot of schools, teaching critical race theory to young elementary school students and older. So when George Floyd happened, of course, Americans were waiting to scream one answer and one answer only to that predicament: racism. And so then we enter the summer of 2020, and they start burning down cities and blocks and police stations and courthouses and calling to cancel anything that was founded or based on racism. And so they said we had to cancel Aunt Jemima, the syrup lady. You know, that's racist. But then here's where it gets hilarious, because the revolution always eats their own. The 1619 Project disciples and BLM Incorporated went after Planned Parenthood, and they said, hey, your founder was a racist too. Hey, you're racist too. You're part of the racism in America too. So silence is violence. Do the work. Shut up. Post the black square. And it's so funny because the premises of critical race theory in the 1619 Project are, remember, if something's based and founded in racism and over bigotry, you can't just like trim the racist branches and twigs and try to redeem it. You got to burn the whole thing down. But, of course, they didn't apply that to Planned Parenthood, the sacred cow of liberalism in the Democrat Party. But they applied enough pressure that Planned Parenthood came out with their New York chapter director, Karen Seltzer, in July of 2020 and basically said Margaret Sanger was a racist. She did damage to communities of color, and so we're going to take her name off of our Manhattan flagship New York City Planned Parenthood mega clinic. And New York City took the sign off of that corner called the Margaret Sanger Square. So the city canceled Sanger, and Planned Parenthood canceled Sanger. And remember, the Margaret Sanger Award went to Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi. Barack Obama spoke at their events. Like, this is the woman who was praised, honored, platformed, and they whitewashed her, and they carried water for her, and they refused to entertain any of the conservative critiques against the founding of Planned Parenthood and the ideas, worldviews, and movements that they were a part of that are the tone and tenor of that organization today. So we open up the film and book, The 1916 Project, with this question, Roberta: if they've lied to you about their patron saint, what else are they lying to us about? And what's the real history behind the abortion movement and the sexual revolution? And I think it's a good time for this project to come out, if I'm being honest, because the entire Democrat Party and liberal establishment have been saying for the last 9 months that this election in November will be a referendum on abortion. They're making it all about the killing of babies, and I decided it's time to blow the top off of where this revolution came from, what ideas animated those early revolutionaries that created Planned Parenthood and the abortion movement, and how is that connected to actually most of the evil we're seeing unfold today before our eyes in the 21st century at such a rapid rate. So that's the 1960 Project. The book came out September 4th. And the film comes out October 5th with Angel Studios.
Fantastic. Okay. As you were going through that information, I was just thinking again about how this is another rewriting of history. Like they totally eliminated the knowledge that Margaret Sanger first had abortion clinics in the black communities and was trying to annihilate the black people. Yet that's totally overlooked by the people calling everything racist.
We've been being lied to and duped for a long time,
right.
Roberta. And so we can talk about whatever you'd like. We can talk about the Negro Project initiative of Planned Parenthood. We can talk about Sanger's mentors, her multiple affairs, the people she was cheating on her husband with, her secular discipleship. There's such a wicked history behind her links to the Nazis and to Alfred Kinsey and the pedophilic, pornographic, child pornography industry. We've connected all of this with all the citations and proof, and homeschoolers and Christian parents will especially appreciate the book. It's actually called The 1916 Project, The Lying, the Witch, and the War We Were In. And so you can get that on Amazon or wherever you get your books, or from our website if you want to support the ministry and not Amazon, which is just the1916project.com.
Well, we're going to talk more about what the church should be doing when we come back in just a moment. I'm reminding the listeners I'm talking with Seth Gruber regarding the documentary, The 1916 Project, and you're listening to Author's Corner. I'm Roberta Foster. So one of the things that you challenge us with in the documentary is what should the church be doing, and why are we in the place that we are today in relationship to the church?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, America, it's important to just say this, I know your listeners probably know this, is a Christian nation. America was launched by Christians. The colonists who came here to be able to live out their Christian faith without being kind of morally defiled in a sort of sodomite sort of city, they came here for Christian living. All of the precepts and worldviews and ideas that founded this republic are overtly Christian. And so now in America, we stand on the shoulders of giants and we think that we're flying. We forget the sacrifices and costs that these freedoms and liberties come at, and that it was our forebears and our Christian family that established this republic. And so the role of the church in the country is, I mean, it should be self-evident to Americans, but unfortunately it's not. I mean, this was such a Christian nation, Roberta, that in some of the early colonies, you actually had to prove your membership at a Protestant church before you were allowed to run for public office. And so when you know, the left and even squishy Mitt Romney fake conservatives on the right say things like, "Well, Christian nationalism is so dangerous to the republic." What are you talking about? This Christian nationalism is just, I'm a Christian, but also we should prioritize our nation first. And if we're going to have a religion that dictates the public terms of engagement, it should be Christianity that built this republic. I mean, like, can you imagine today if the Republican Party said, you can't run for office unless you can prove your membership at an evangelical church? But that was basically what was happening in the early seeds of our republic. And so that's just examples of why the church is needed and why the church has always played a role in standing for freedom and life and liberty and establishing a government to protect those rights. And so as the church has disengaged from the culture and from the politics, and they've read, I guess, too many Rick Warren and Andy Stanley books, and decided that, you know, I just preach the gospel. I just preach the gospel, whatever that means. I thought that meant the full counsel of God, but I think they just mean Jesus loves you, he died for you, and so you should follow him. Well, I don't, that when I say the gospel, that's not what I mean. I mean the message of salvation and then discipleship and actually being refined and actually adopting a Christian worldview. But when people say, I just preach the gospel, so I can't talk about political issues, what I say is, no, actually, you won't preach against false religion, pastor, that masquerades as politics to keep the politically impotent pastor silent because you're under the spell of the Johnson Amendment, which is this idea of the separation of church and state. By the way, if that's true, shouldn't we keep the state out of the church? Oh, wait, no, they only mean that as a one-way street. They only want to prevent the church from seeking to influence secular governments for God's purposes. By the way, the Johnson minute came from Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was the same guy who later said as president, I'll have those Negroes voting Democrat for the next 200 years. Okay, the guy was a racist. The guy was a horrible. It's where we get the Great Society Act, where they would pay black women money from the state only if there wasn't a father in the home. And so then the black marriage rate was actually worse under Democrats ruling than it was in the 2 years right after slavery ended. And so anyways, Margaret Sanger is a part of this whole movement because she also had it out for black people and those that the white elites defined as sort of unfit to reproduce. But it was the church that was tasked with proclaiming the truth, with standing for truth. Every great revival is always preceded by two things: intense prayerfulness and also care and love and protection for the vulnerable, the marginalized, the attacked, the unloved, the unlovely. And it was Christians who were always leading the way in justice, not social justice. If you have to put any qualifier before the word justice, then you don't know what justice is. Okay, there's justice and there's injustice. There's not social justice. There's not environmental justice. There's not reproductive justice. There's just justice and injustice. It was the church that was standing up and establishing justice, because one of the lessons of history is that when Christianity is ripped out of a society, we don't all get coexist bumper stickers. We actually don't enter a utopian, libertarian dream where everyone's religion and worldview, it just all gets along. We just all get along. One of the biggest lessons of history is that's not real. That could never happen. That's not how human nature works. Man needs a creed to live by, a standard to live by. And so when you rip Christianity out of a culture, we actually just go back to demon worship. Like we just go back to demonic ideologies and principles that end up ruining the republic. And so if the church flatulent won't become the church militant, it will become the church irrelevant. And by militant, I don't mean AR-15s. I mean like militant in your righteousness and fervor to stand and to be engaged. And so the church is becoming increasingly more irrelevant now in the republic because we're so disengaged. And young people, Gen Zers in particular, the most medicated, depressed, and suicidal generation in American history, they're craving and screaming for truth, for answers, for a guide, actually, for a map to help navigate the insanity of their lives in the 21st century. And it should be the church providing that clarity and truth, or else those young people will go try to find answers to their questions somewhere else. And I'll tell you this right now, the secular humanists, the globalists, the neo-Malthusian, Planned Parenthood, baby-killing, destroy-the-marriage, eugenicists are happy to provide answers to young people that pastors are no longer willing to engage with the full counsel of God. So that's just history. That's just a truism, that when Christians in the church disengage, nature abhors a vacuum and something will take its place. And I'll tell you, it'll be a lot more dangerous, a lot more deadly, and a lot more demonic than whatever we had before. And so this is why the church needs to stand, and this is why my ministry, the White Rose Resistance, with our film, with our chapters around the country, we're getting the church out of their comfortable caves or congregations and be like Gideon in Judges 6 and start tearing down these high places of the sex cults and the baby killing, which are always go together, by the way. Weird sexual liberation and then child sacrifice, those two sins have been linked since time immemorial. It's those things that God tells Gideon to tear down first in Judges 6. Those are the things that make God the most angry. So if we want revival and reformation in America, it will have to begin by removing the same evils that we're seeing unfold before us now in the 21st century. And it's not progressive. It's not progressivism. It's regressive. And so that now's the time for the church to wake up. And so that's what we're doing at the White Rose Resistance. And we'd ask anyone who wants to join us in waking up the church to save the children, stand for life, and rebuild the family, to screen this film at your church. Go to the 1916project.com, the 1916project.com, and any church in America can host a screening at their church right now. And it'll rip your face off. It'll change your life forever. You'll learn things you've never heard before, and you'll wonder, why have I never heard these things before? Exactly. We've been being lied to for a long time. Our team did the work of finding all the truth, putting it all together in a beautiful 75-minute full-length documentary. It's streaming on October 5th with Angel Studios for 2 weeks for Angel Guild members, and then the last 2 weeks of October leading up to the election, we decided to make it free, completely free to stream on Angel and on Twitter, or X, right in the lead up to the election. So that's what we're up to, Roberta, and thank you for having me on your program.
Absolutely. And so today I was talking with Seth Gruber about the documentary, The 1916 Project. And Seth, thank you so much for sharing your heart with our listeners today.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's interview or would like to hear it again, You can find it on your favorite podcast platform or through kneo.org. So join me again next time on Author's Corner. I'm Roberta Foster.